Divorce rates have been on the charts lately and their consequences are usually awful. If you do, just hear me out. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to help in the channel's growth. Carlos had always been a hardworking and dedicated man. At 40 years old, he had built a life that seemed perfect in the eyes of others, a cozy home in the suburbs, a stable job as a sales manager at a respectable company, and a wife, Fernanda, with whom he had been married for 15 years. However, behind closed doors, the reality was quite different. Fernanda had always been a cold and distant woman. Carlos struggled to understand her behavior, but the truth was that the love that once united them had dissipated over the years. Conversations became rare, and displays of affection were nearly non-existent. He tried to keep the relationship alive, but with each attempt, he felt like he was fighting against an unyielding wall. When Fernanda finally asked for a divorce, Carlos was shocked. The news hit him like a brutal blow. He never expected things to escalate to this point. The divorce process was exhausting and painful. Fernanda demanded the house they had shared, claiming it was the family home and she needed it to raise the children, even though the kids were already grown and living in other cities. Carlos was devastated to realize he would lose not only his home but the emotional stability it represented. He tried to negotiate, to offer a fair settlement, but Fernanda was unyielding. With the help of experienced lawyers, she got everything she wanted. The court ruled in Fernanda's favor, and Carlos found himself condemned to pay a high alimony each month. The amount was exorbitant, consuming almost half of his salary. He couldn't understand how his life had changed so drastically in such a short time. The house where he had experienced so many happy moments now belonged to someone else, and he was about to be evicted from his own life. He moved into a small apartment in an old, dilapidated building in the city center. The place was dark and cramped, the walls were thin, and he could hear his neighbors arguing or playing loud music late into the night. The smell of mold permeated the air, and the windows were so dirty they hardly let any natural light in. Each time he entered that tiny space, Carlos felt a weight on his chest. It was as if he were living in a prison. The apartment had only a small bedroom with a single bed and an improvised table made of stacked boxes. The kitchen was minuscule, barely fitting a stove and a sink. The bathroom had peeling tiles and a constantly leaking shower. With every drop of water hitting the floor, Carlos was reminded of the comfortable life he had left behind. He often found himself staring at the peeling walls, imagining what it would be like to live in a place where he truly felt at home again. His daily routine became an endless cycle of hard work and emotional suffering. He woke up early every day to catch the crowded public transport to his job. The hours dragged on as he tried to stay focused on sales and the targets set by the company. The stress was constant. His colleagues noticed the change in his demeanor. He was more withdrawn and less sociable. The joy that once radiated from him was now just a distant shadow. Carlos worked hard to save every possible cent, but with alimony and the bills for the apartment, he barely managed to pay for his basic needs. Meals became simple and repetitive. Often, he was satisfied with rice and beans or instant noodles. On good days, he allowed himself to buy a piece of chicken or an egg to complement his meal, but that happened rarely. The nights were long and lonely. He spent hours thinking about how his life had changed so drastically. Often, he would sit at the improvised table with a cheap beer in hand, trying to drown his sorrows in drink while staring at the turned-off television, seeking some form of company. Weekends were especially difficult. While his friends went out to enjoy life, dining out or traveling, Carlos found himself trapped at home, with no money to go out or do anything fun. He tried to fill the void by watching television or reading books borrowed from the local library, but nothing seemed to ease his sadness. The feeling of failure consumed him slowly. He wondered how he had let all of this happen, how he hadn't noticed the signs of the collapse of his marriage. Guilt was a constant companion. He felt responsible for Fernanda's happiness and for the disintegration of the family they had built together. As the months passed, Carlos began to feel the physical effects of accumulated stress. He lost weight rapidly due to poor nutrition and constant pressure at work. Dark circles became permanent under his tired eyes, and his hair began to gray prematurely. Looking in the mirror, He scarcely recognized the man reflected back. The worry lines on his face told stories of pain and disillusionment. Social interactions became increasingly rare. Carlos avoided meeting friends out of shame regarding his financial situation. He didn't want to be seen as a failure or someone who couldn't take care of his own life. Loneliness became his only faithful companion. He preferred to stay home rather than go out to social events. The end-of-year holidays were particularly difficult for Carlos. While everyone celebrated joyfully around abundant tables, he felt isolated in his small, empty apartment. Christmas passed without presents or decorations. Only a tiny artificial tree he had found discarded on the street reminded him of the festive season. The new year arrived without promises or renewed hopes. Carlos had no expectations for the future. He felt trapped in an endless cycle of financial and emotional suffering, unsure how to escape his desperate situation. Life continued in this way, day after day, without significant changes or relief in sight. The daily struggle to re-establish his financial life seemed impossible in the face of mounting debts and the relentless alimony that continued to drain his finances. Carlos often dreamed of better days, a higher-paying job, or even a new chance at love, but reality always pulled him back to the same painful place, the small apartment that felt more like a tomb than a home, and the memories of a life he could never regain. He began to seek alternatives to improve his financial situation. He took online courses at night on digital marketing, hoping to land a better-paying job or even start his own business online. However, each attempt seemed thwarted by a lack of time or sufficient financial resources to invest in something new. The nights dragged on as he studied. After long, exhausting days at work, he often fell asleep over open books or in front of the computer, too tired to continue learning something new. Over time, and despite his efforts, Carlos realized that he was stuck in a vicious cycle hard to break. The bills kept coming while his hopes dwindled. Despair began to take over him. The overwhelming feeling of helplessness became unbearable. One day, amid the mounting pressure of his debts, he decided to go to the bank to try to negotiate some overdue accounts. Upon entering the cold atmosphere of the bank, it seemed to reflect his emotional state. He waited nervously as he watched other customers being served. When it was finally his turn, he explained his situation to the manager. The man behind the counter's gaze was impassive. "I'm sorry," he said indifferently. "We can't help you at this time." That response sliced through him like a knife. Carlos left the bank feeling even more defeated. The accumulated frustration led him to seek solace in alcohol. He bought several cheap cans on his way home, feeling guilty for yet another escape. Upon arriving at the apartment, he opened one can after another while staring at the turned-off television. That dark night, with the lights off, he reflected on everything he had lost. The silence of the apartment seemed to echo his inner anguish. The shattered dreams weighed heavily on his shoulders like invisible chains. And so, his life continued, a continuous tale of suffering, without happy endings or magical solutions in sight, just a man trying to survive in a world that seemed to have completely forgotten him. Each day became a struggle for survival as he tried to find some light amid that endless darkness. In the following months, Carlos began to notice subtle changes around him. Distant friends started gradually disappearing from social media. Those with whom he used to share laughter now seemed too busy with their own happy lives to notice his silent suffering. He often revisited old memories through photos saved on his phone. The radiant smiles from family vacations became painful reminders of the happy past that now felt as distant as a life lived in another dimension. With every new notification on his phone, be it invitations to parties or announcements about special promotions, Carlos felt increasingly isolated. The desire for social connection became almost unbearable, yet, at the same time, shame held him back from seeking support. One particularly tough night resulted in silent tears as he gazed out the dirty window of his apartment, watching happy couples walking together under the lights of the city illuminated by the full moon. A deep pain filled his heart as he realized how truly alone he was. Yet, even in the face of this overwhelming pain, Carlos decided to try to change his situation. With renewed determination, after weeks submerged in sadness, he began seeking extra jobs during his free time. He spent hours sending out resumes online while networking with former colleagues in the desperate hope of finding something better. After weeks of trying to find new opportunities, the response finally came, an interview scheduled to work as a salesperson in a local store. Although it was just a temporary job, Carlos saw it as a real chance to start anew. On the day of the interview, anxiety overtook him again. He put on his best clothes, the ones that still fit after months of not buying anything new. Upon arriving at the store, the vibrant atmosphere brought back memories of the good old days when he worked in sales. The interview went well, the manager praised his previous experience and offered him the job immediately. Although it was only part-time, Carlos felt invigorated to have landed something new. However, the joys were fleeting. With the new job came new financial responsibilities, daily transportation costs along with the already existing monthly bills. And so, even with this new opportunity, the financial pressure continued to mount. Meanwhile, loneliness persisted. Even while working again among new people, Carlos still struggled with that deep emptiness inside him. His coworkers seemed too distant to form meaningful bonds, everyone was too busy living their lives while he remained trapped in the shadows. Weeks passed quickly as he tried to balance the additional work with daily obligations, but he always ended up returning to the same painful point, that small apartment where it all began. And so his life continued, a continuous tale of suffering, without happy endings or magical solutions in sight. Each day became harder than the last. A man fighting against endless internal demons with no end in sight. And though there were small victories along the way, the crushing weight of reality remained unbearable. An endless struggle for survival in a world indifferent to his silent pains. What are your takes on this story? Comment here and subscribe for more.